traumatic brain injuries, the causes that cause them, and their effects on students in the classroom and as people. What causes traumatic brain injuries? Traumatic brain injuries can be caused by falls, vehicle-related collisions such as car accidents, violence, which includes child abuse, sometimes shaking baby syndrome. There's also sports injuries that can occur during contact sports with balls, sticks such as hockey, football, soccer, and sometimes lacrosse. And also explosive blasts or other combat injuries through that happen throughout military combat are also a possible example of traumatic brain injury. Traumatic brain injury is you can see on the left is a normal brain, and on the right is a brain that has suffered traumatic brain injury. So there's swelling in the brain that can cause damage to and symptoms in a variety of ways. So there are two different types of traumatic brain injuries. They're actually on a spectrum of injuries. Mild traumatic brain injuries include effects on brain cells temporarily, whereas severe often result in bruising, torn tissues, bleeding, or sometimes even death. For mild traumatic brain injuries, it includes the state of being dazed, confused, disoriented, impacts on nausea and vomiting, fatigue, problems with speech, dizziness, or loss of balance, whereas severe can cause repeated vomiting and nausea, convulsions, or sometimes even seizures, the constant dilation of a pupil or both pupils in the eyes. Sometimes clear fluids from the brain can drain through the nose and ears. Sometimes there's an inability to awaken from sleep or a loss of consciousness. Within that, there's also symptoms in both mild and severe include nausea, as I said, blurred vision, ringing in the ears, memory, and even concentration. Death is obviously the most extreme symptom of traumatic brain injury, but it's also interesting to note and important to note that traumatic brain injuries aren't initially seen the first time. They sometimes come about in up to 1 or 2 days or even weeks, sometimes hours after an traumatic experience occurs. So if a child was playing in a football game on a Tuesday night and they were hit in the back of their head, it is possible that they could have severe symptoms on Wednesday afternoon. So as a teacher, it's always interesting to know. It's always important to know when a child has a game, and if a parent says that there was an incident that occurred, it's really important to be aware of symptoms of traumatic brain injuries. Specifically in infants and children, sometimes they're unable to communicate headaches, sensory problems, or confusions that symptoms can cause. So it's important to note changing eating or nursing habits, irritability, persistent crying, or inability to be consoled, inability to pay attention, sleep habits, seizures, a sad mood that's unlike them, unusual drowsiness, or even a loss of interest. You can notice that the child on the right is a child who has experienced shaking baby syndrome. Shaking baby syndrome has a variety of symptoms itself, but traumatic brain injury is often caused by that, and it's important to know that the lethargic eyes and pale blue skin, even sometimes excessive amounts of movement of the child, can cause brain injury to an infant who's really young. Traumatic brain injuries impacts on students is quite vast, especially as children, but the cognitive and overall problems that traumatic brain injury can occur are really wide. With so many symptoms, it's important to be aware after any moment of traumatic brain injury. So I'll provide some examples for these levels right now. So some cognitive problems that can impact students from traumatic brain injury are their memory, their attention, and also concentration within the classroom. Executive functioning issues are also caused by traumatic brain injury that can pertain to multitasking, planning of coursework, or also the organization of the student's personal area, or even their organization of their materials. If a child is coming in every day unable to find their things or keep themselves organized, it's interesting to note that it could be an issue of executive functioning. And if that child had previously had a traumatic brain injury, that could be the force behind that. Communication, in terms of understanding or actually participating in speaking and writing, are a common cause from traumatic brain injury. Social issues may occur after traumatic brain injury, um, such as being able to read social cues from their peers. So, if a student has had traumatic brain injury, it is possible that they are unable to read the cues of their peers and can sometimes create frustration or disruption within the classroom. Um, emotion, Emotional changes in terms of depression and anxiety are also a common cause. If they're unable to control their own mind or their own capabilities, it can cause distress in other areas. Um, a key component of right following traumatic brain injury is the sensitivity to light or hearing sensitivity. Sometimes it can manifest in the inability to look at electronic devices, watching TV, also loud noises, and even can manifest in the ringing of ears. So some accommodations for students with traumatic brain injury, and I broke them down into environmental and also academic. So environmental accommodations are minimizing stimulation for that student, so putting them in an area with really warm colors, but calm in a sense that there's not a lot of movement, so not by the door, because that can easily distract them from what's going on. Providing that student with this minimizing stimulation is preferential seating, so giving them the opportunity to find the spot that best help their needs, but also their capabilities of working. Small group instruction will be really important. Um, this also goes to the academic piece, because if a student is unable to focus due to their traumatic brain injury, small group instruction really helps them hone in on those skills by themselves and with their small peers. Providing students with a written schedule will allow them to follow along with the flow of the day without having the expectation of having to memorize it. The establishment of a classroom buddy where the student is able to go and speak with another individual as often as possible is another great opportunity to help a student who is suffering through traumatic brain injury stay on top of their studies and also feels they're in control of their own day. Integrating organizational tools such as desk organizers, specific labeling of where materials should go, but also checklists are a great opportunity to keep students on task and also organized with their materials as their brain is adjusting to dealing with a traumatic brain injury. They might simply not be able to organize themselves in a way that works best for them. Some academic accommodations that are necessary for students with traumatic brain injury include extended time on assessments and also extended opportunities for breaks. Because of overstimulation, it will take students more time to fulfill assignments, but also while their brain is working extra hard to finish the assignments, they'll need more breaks than an average student. Verbal and written reiteration of directions are very important based on the needs and best skills for the student. If a student is having trouble listening, obviously written directions is best. But if a student is having a hard time looking at written work, then making sure that there are verbal cues and verbally going over assignments with them is really important. In addition to the ability to organize, breaking down large assignments into smaller parts is a great tool to use for students with TBI, as it will allow them to be able to check off small sections and to only focus on a small task at once. With that, graphic organizers and models for all assignments is a necessary way to allow students to meet their full potential and not be hindered by their traumatic brain injury. As a teacher, you also could either facilitate note-taking from yourself or from a peer to allow the student to have adequate notes without having to have to make the breakdown of what is being said to what is being written on their paper. An also important cue is to make sure that a student with traumatic brain injury is attended to before you start speaking, because simply missing a short direction can really throw them off and feel as though they missed a huge chunk of the day. Frequent repetition of important tasks, such as morning routines or afternoon routines, or even organization within the classroom is very important, and also flexibility with the student to remind them and what steps they need to do to be a full member, and not hindering them for their traumatic brain injury. Some additional therapy options for individuals who have dealt with traumatic brain injuries are rehabilitation, either inpatient or outpatient, specific physical therapy to deal with the physical or cognitive executive functioning skills. Sometimes that can also occupational therapy to deal with the written work, and also being able to deal with fine motor and gross motor skills that might have been hindered during their injury, but also speech and language pathologist therapy, because as your brain, it has so much to do with communication. The speaking and both speaking, listening, and understanding are all interconnected with speech and language, and those issues might be increased from the injury. So some opportunities for preventing traumatic brain injury on students, especially infants and toddlers, because their brains are still forming and their skull is not fully formed, as a teenager or even an adult's head might be strong. It's important to keep stairs clear of clutter, install safety gates, window guards to prevent falls out of the window, non-slip mats for bathtubs and showers. This is also important for any elderly members of your community. The use of plantfolders that have shock absorbing material to ensure that if a child falls off the top of the monkey bars and they hit their head, that it's not that the school is putting every precaution in place. Area rugs, because individuals are easily able to trip on those, and also not letting children obviously play in fire escapes or balconies for the risk of falling. Some resources for those affected by the traumatic brain injury are the Family Caregiver Alliance. It's an online resource that provides families with facts, consequences, and also rehabilitation tips. This Caregiver Alliance deals with all aspects of caregiving from traumatic brain injury, but also other um, areas of injury. It's a great resource for people to find out what their injury is, and also what the potential risks of it are. Brainline provides individuals with traumatic brain injury, military veterans, and also professionals and educators resources on the trauma side of traumatic brain injury, because while it is a brain injury, there's also often associated with PTSD, as the individual has to relive their symptoms every day, but they also will sometimes have to deal with the emotional component of dealing with a brain injury that has affected their life forever. The Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts focuses on support, prevention, education, and advocacy within the state of Massachusetts for those dealing with traumatic brain injury. And also the National Association for Special Education Teachers provides educators and families strategies on traumatic brain injuries as it relates to schools. Here are my references. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.